At any point in our lives, how many of us have considered happiness as one of our life goals? Me too. I had a very unique childhood. My family and I moved every couple of years because my dad, a civil engineer from Mutare, Zimbabwe, worked on contracts with non-governmental organizations. As a result, I lived in almost 10 different countries, and I attended over 10 different schools. Although this may seem exciting for many of you, as a child, I faced challenges that most people only experience once in their childhood. I was the new kid 10 times. I was the outsider 10 times. I made close friends 10 times, and I had to move away from these friends 10 different times. For this reason, I hope you can understand that I hated moving as much as we did at first. My parents can attest to the fact that I hardly ever got on that plane without a few sessions of kicking and screaming beforehand. However, over time, something changed. I realized that every time we moved, I was always able to find joyful experiences wherever we lived. I began to value the experiences I was gaining. Now, this realization didn't make making friends any easier, nor did it erase the excruciatingly awkward feeling of introducing myself to a new classroom yet again. But what it did do was it gave me reassurance, knowing that all these challenges were a necessary part of creating yet another fulfilling experience with amazing friends and memorable lessons about people and places that were once entirely foreign to me. So fast forward years later to August of 2015, when I moved to the United States to attend college. In the months leading up to my move, I spent hours reading on how to ensure a perfect college experience, succeed in class, make friends, all before actually setting foot on an all before actually setting foot on a college campus. You see, for the first time in my life, I could decide where I went and what school I would attend. And I was determined to find what the college websites referred to as a perfect fit for me. So imagine my surprise when a few months into my freshman year, I was incredibly unhappy. I was met with a culture that was so different from anything I'd ever encountered. At first, I thought that this was the biggest issue, but I found myself feeling more and more unhappy with the place that I was in. I began to compare my happiness with that of my peers. I saw others laughing and smiling and making friends, and this just made me feel like I wasn't fitting in. We were asked to write ourselves a letter in a class that first semester, and I began my letter with the words, "Dear Nicolette, please transfer." I then proceeded to list arguments to convince my future self that I should transfer, and most of these were rooted in expectations that I had set for my college experience prior to my freshman year. Looking back, I asked myself why I felt like this, but more importantly, why now? I had lived in rural Namibia, and I had gone to boarding school on a secluded hill in Baban, Eswatini. I'd also experienced the lack of a summer in Dublin, Ireland, and yet I'd never felt this way before. Now, fast forward, 4 years later, I have a degree in economics. I didn't end up transferring, and in fact, I really enjoyed my experience. So Since it wasn't the place or the school, why was I so unhappy? Was I happy before, or why was this happiness my goal, and why couldn't I reach it? When did I begin to pursue this false and unrealistic idea of happiness? I say false because I know now that happiness isn't something that should be pursued as a life goal. I know now that we do ourselves a great disservice by seeking it, because frankly, the entire idea of happiness rests on the entire idea of happiness rests on our ability to achieve it, when the concept itself depends on things that we cannot control. I know by now you must be convinced that I'm extremely pessimistic, but let me explain further. The main difference between my previous experiences and my freshman year was how my perception had changed. In my college research and in my culture shock, I took on and I fully immersed myself in the Western ideas of the pursuit of happiness. I had adopted a different mental map. I heard someone talk about this idea of mental maps around the time that I was reflecting on my experiences. We all use mental maps for almost everything that we do. These are mental directions on how to complete a task. So if I have a mental map on how to get to my friend's house, for example, I will arrive only if my mental map aligns with reality. But if my mental map does not align with reality, then I will be lost. Hypothetically speaking, of course, in a world without GPS. Our mental maps are created by our experiences and what we are told. My experience in college had drilled a new mental map into my head. It told me what it meant to be happy and what it would take for me to be happy with my college experience. I had followed this formula, and I had done all the necessary work to find the school that was the best fit for me, and yet I was still unhappy. This mental map did not correspond with reality because I didn't achieve the desired outcome. Then I began to see how my experience with pursuing happiness in the context of my college experience was embedded in the Western ideas of the pursuit of happiness. I realized that the Western pursuit of happiness is often seen as a euphemism for the pursuit of wealth. The media, our friends, our culture repeat this idea that to be happy is to be wealthy. And there's this emphasis on being the best in our careers or getting good grades, being accepted, being loved. The list goes on. Much like my college experience, this mental map does not correspond with reality. So it's no surprise that when we look at the statistics for mental illness, anxiety, and depression in the United States, they're on the rise despite the United States getting closer and closer to fulfilling this criteria, to this definition of the Western pursuit of happiness. Why is this? Why, despite getting closer to fulfilling these things, is this happiness still so unattainable? In my exploration, I decided to go back to the basic idea of happiness itself and its definition. And I realized that underlying this definition are two overlooked assumptions. The first of these is that intrinsically, happiness is so heavily reliant on comparison. We are only truly happy relative to someone else. So no matter what we do, there will always be someone that's more successful, more popular, more accepted, more loved. The list goes on. Secondly, this definition of happiness relies on good pre-existing conditions. I often speak to people about where I'm from, and although I've been told that I speak great English, which I know means I don't have a thick accent, now and again people will pick up on my different accent and ask me where I'm from. This conversation is often followed by accounts of their own visits to some African country, and I always inquire about their perceptions of that place. An answer I often get is that people were surprised by just how happy the people were. At first, I never thought too much of this, but I now realize that because many African countries are faced with poverty and economic hardship, they do not have these good pre-existing conditions that are necessary to fulfill this definition of happiness. And yet they do experience joy. Author David Brooks equates the Western pursuit of happiness to climbing a mountain. And just as you reach the peak, realizing that there's yet another mountain to climb. It's misleading and unfulfilling. This is exactly how I felt as a freshman in college telling myself to transfer. When I go back to my experiences from before college, there are two major things that stand out to me. The first is that with every move, I always had an overwhelming acceptance of the place that I was in. I was aware of the fact that where I moved to was out of my control, but I was open to the possibilities of growth that that place could offer. I was accepting of the struggles that I was bound to face, and I didn't compare the place I was in with where I could be because I wasn't there yet. Since graduating college, I've been working at a 3-month-long internship in the nonprofit sector. Ultimately, I want to get hired as a full-time employee, and I've sort of been plotting my strategy to getting there. The position is great, and for the most part, I get to plan my own time. So I could spend all my time networking and trying to get hired, but in doing so, I would be losing out on the learning experience that would make me a great candidate. By remaining aware of my position as an intern, I'm able to take advantage of the opportunities that this stage has to offer. I'm able to master what I'm doing, make lasting connections, and explore whether this is, in fact, the field for me. So when I do attend networking events, I have so many more questions to ask and so much more to talk about. And these are things I would have never gained was I simply focused on getting hired. Instead of obsessing over getting the promotion or making it to 6 figures, what if we took the time to acknowledge where we are now? Maybe we would realize the strengths that we currently possess. Maybe we would find new ways of doing things and pave ways for others in our fields. By being aware of our current stage in life, we're able to take advantage of the opportunities that this stage has to offer. We are able to learn not to compare ourselves to others and to refrain from judging ourselves. The second thing I realized as I was thinking back to my time before coming to America was that some of the most fulfilling moments in my life were those where I was a part of something greater than myself, when I was able to use my talents to help others and bring joy. Now, this didn't always bring me a sense of bliss. It was often hard to do, but it was always worth it because of the fulfillment. I did have a great college experience, and it wasn't at all perfect. I experienced great successes and some equally great failures. I was a part of student organizations, and I even started some of my own. I found love, or so I thought. I fought depression. I didn't always get the grades I wanted. I lost friends. But through my struggles, I gained lifelong friendships and partners that cried with me during senior thesis and encouraged me through seemingly endless nights of studying. After accepting the realities of life and the reality of the persistent presence of hardship and challenges, submitting ourselves to something greater than ourselves, that we can achieve using the talents and the gifts that we currently have. That's what makes life worth living despite the challenges. The same remains true for me now. As I continue to navigate my life, my career, my friendships, this Western idea of happiness is no longer my life goal. I have new goals now. One of these is being aware of my current stage in life. One way that I've been able to do this is through journaling. And at the end of every entry, I always write down my hope for what I'm experiencing. I want to do that here. My hope is that this idea of happiness will no longer be the life goal for so many of us, just to realize further down the line that it's just not worth pursuing. But rather, that we would focus our efforts and rethink our reality, and focus our efforts into more worthwhile pursuits. Ones that are achievable despite the conditions, believable even in the absence of comparison, and allow for joy to be attainable regardless of our age or our stage in life. Thank you so much.